At the beginning, I thought that we have to make peace with King Hussein. That would eventually represent both the Jordanians and the Palestinians. I think by geography and reason, we are a triangle, Jordan, Palestine, ourselves. So I went to negotiate with King Hussein, secretly, and we reached an agreement. The last negotiations took place in London in a private home of a friend of the king and a friend of mine. I remember that the wife of this person, who is a lawyer, sent away all her staff and she cooked herself. And at the end of the dinner, I suggested to the king that we should go and wash the wishes. And the king was so happy to do so, but she wouldn't let us, so we didn't do it. Anyway, we sat for 8 hours and we heard out our agreement. I think this was the best agreement we ever had. But at that time, we had the National Union government, 50% Likud and 50% us. And the Likud party did not agree. So we lost maybe our best opportunity for peace, to my deep regret. Then I thought, my God, we don't have a choice but to negotiate with the Palestinians, with the PLO, with Arafat. We have had many contacts with the PLO people, but I noticed, like many people in exile, they have a tendency to make from every problem an ideology, and from non-ideology a solution. So you argue and argue and argue endlessly. And I was looking for a person among the Palestinians who can come down to earth. Because the arguments are well known by both sides, and it's almost a waste of time to begin and blame and accuse and demand. And then among the many contacts, there was one person that I asked him to do something which for me would be a test, for him very difficult. We have had 2 levels of negotiations, one directly with the Palestinians, and the other which is called the multinational negotiations. One was about the borders, and the other was about the relations, with the participation of many nations. Practically everybody participated in it. One of those groups was dealing with refugees, headed by a representative of Canada. We're supposed to nominate a person to represent our side, the Palestinians a person to represent their side. The Palestinians nominated somebody who was a member of the PNC, Palestinian National Council. According to law, they weren't permitted to negotiate with the PLO. So I approached this person. I says, look, you want to negotiate? You want to be serious? Replace your man. And instead of him saying, as usually anybody would say, it's impossible, forget it, he said, I shall try. And it didn't take much time, he replaced him. So I told myself, that's it. He's the man. Because, it's one thing to win arguments, and another thing is to arrive to solutions. So 2 different vocations. The Prime Minister was Yitzhak Rabin and myself. Yitzhak was conducting the negotiations that took place in Washington between us and the Jordanian Palestinian group. I told him from the outset that nothing will come out of it, because after every meeting there was a press conference. Negotiations and lack of discretion is like to make love in the middle of the street. There are things that you have to keep in the dark. And I told him about this man. He says, let me try with him. He wouldn't believe. So he says, okay, try. And while the negotiations in Washington deteriorated from day to day, our negotiations in Oslo went up from day to day. We did it, half legally, because there was a decision by the parliament that we should not negotiate with the Palestinians, the PLO. I wanted to go to negotiate directly with them, but Yitzhak Rabin told me, look, it would be very strange that the minister of the cabinet is breaking the law. So I sent my director general of the foreign ministry, who is a brilliant chap. And we went together with a lawyer, Israeli lawyer, who is also a brilliant lawyer. And the man that I was mentioning is Abu Allah, who is now the Speaker of the Parliament, which I believe is probably the most intelligent man that I can think of among the Palestinians. And the two of them established a chemistry immediately, Abu Allah and Savir. What they were telling each other, nobody knows, and they never try to find out. Because, it's really like a romantic experience. You have to seduce, you have to impress, and very often to close a little bit your eyes, because if you see everything too naked, you may lose your taste. The last night before the agreement, which was August 1993, it also happened to be my birthday, so I was a little bit emotional. We reached a breakdown. And then we negotiated through the telephone with Arafat, myself, 8 hours. I was in Sweden, he was in Tunisia, there was Mr. Larsen from the Norwegian side, and the late Foreign Minister of Norway, Holst. The telephone was so good. I could hear their cries. I could hear their suffering. I shall never forget this experience. Shall I say, it's like a lady giving birth to a child. The pains, the hopes. And early in the morning, we reached an agreement by phone. And then the Norwegian organized a secret meeting of signature, because still the cabinet didn't approve. I was there, and Abu Allah was there. It was filmed by the Secret Service of Norway. We wouldn't let anybody else enter it. And at the end of the signature, it's a long story, I won't go into all the details. Abu Allah asked me to see me privately. What happened is, in the morning, we're supposed to sign at night. There was a clash between the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and 9 soldiers of our army lost their life. The contrast was so great, the prepared champagne, and an environment of happiness, and there 9 boys were killed. So I called up Rabin. I says, look, you know exactly how you feel. We lost 9 boys. Maybe the best thing would be to postpone it. We cannot celebrate tonight, peace agreement. Rabin thought for a while, and with his very deep voice he says, no, we shall sign. But then we removed all the champagnes and all the other niceties. We made it a dry meeting. But by the end of it, as I told you, Abuela came to me, and before he said the word, he burst in tears like a child. You know, there is so much emotions in this negotiation. I was taken by it, I was surprised. And then he said nice things about the fate of his people, about the way we run it and behaved. And I must say, I know many people criticize Arafat for good reasons. He was an impressive leader of the Palestinian revolt and the failure of the Palestinian state. I, for one, will never forget the courageous steps he took. And there is no occasion, whenever they attack Arafat, that I wouldn't come on his side and say, don't forget the courageous decisions he has taken. And I would like to mention just one. With all Arab states, the basis of our negotiation was the United Nations resolution about the 1947 borders. Would we make it a basis for our negotiations with the Palestinians? 55% of the land supposed to go to the Palestinians, 45% to us. So it wouldn't fly. Arafat agreed to the 1967 borders, which gives the Palestinians only 22% and Israel 78%. I don't know any other Palestinian leader that would do it, that was able to do it, and ready to do it. So, you know, you must be fair in your life. And while I criticize Arafat very much, I think later on he spoiled what he has achieved. But still, I remember what should be remembered as well. On the other hand, we on our side went a very long way, because the West Bank was under Arab rule. They never gave it to the Palestinians. Gaza was under Arab rule. They never gave it to the Palestinians. We did it. We helped them to build a Palestinian personality and eventually a Palestinian state. As I remember the role of Arafat, I don't regret the choice we made at that time. I think that when you make a breakthrough, things don't happen automatically and instantly. But without the breakthrough, it would be just a wish in the air. Now, every important decision has to go through a long avenue of disappointments, of setbacks, of troubles. I'm totally unimpressed. I would be surprised if it would go smoothly. Somebody says, you're as great as your quarrel. If you want to achieve something important, you have to fight and quarrel for it under very uncomfortable conditions and circumstances. And then again, when you win a war, your people are united and applaud you. When you make peace, your people are doubtful and resentful. To negotiate peace is to negotiate with your own people, not with your opponent. And your own people say, my God, why did you give up so much? Why were you in a hurry? Why didn't you think this and that? Well, if you think this and that and you won't be in a hurry, Still you'll have to pay the price, because peace has a price, as war has a price. The difference is that the price of war is unavoidably accepted. The price or the cost of peace cannot be measured. I don't think I made a choice to become a politician. When I was a young man in Israel, our major goal, ideologically and otherwise, was to become farmers, members of a kibbutz. So I joined in a youth movement that sent me to an agricultural school where I got my main education. There we organized a small nucleus of boys and girls to go and build a kibbutz. And I went to build a kibbutz. But while doing all this at school and later on at the kibbutz, there was a great debate taking place in Israel on two major issues. One, who represents the world of tomorrow? Socialist, the communist, the Soviet Union, or the democracy, the free world? And where actually does stem from our ideology? My mentor was Ben-Gurion, the founder of the state, and he says, I'm not for an imported socialism. We don't need Marx, and we don't need Lenin, and we don't need even Leon Blum. Our ideologues come from the Bible. Basically two. Prophet Amos with a social temperament, and Isaiah with a political temperament. And I feel I'm identified with Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion was very anti-Stalin, very anti-communist. He called them the most terrible names. He thought they are dictators, they are killers. And that was, at a time when the world still, many intellectuals looked upon Russia as a promise. That was, say, in 38, 37, 39. And the second issue, what should be the future of Israel? Is the land the most important choice? And for that reason, to keep the land at any cost, the wholeness of the land, the whole of the land, or to have a partition and build a Jewish state on part of the land, and the other part, let's leave it to the Palestinians. Here again, I felt that I am with Ben-Gurion. I joined in this youth movement, as I have said, and I was elected to the secretariat of the movement. There were 12 members of the secretariat. I was the only one among the 12 who was on the side of Ben-Gurion. All the others were Marxist-oriented, were for the wholeness of Israel. And then before I knew it, I found myself in a fight. And it took a little bit of time, but finally I won a majority in the youth movement. So before I knew it, I was in politics. I think I was 15 or 16 years old. And then I went to the kibbutz. I worked on the kibbutz, I worked on the land. But I continued my fight. I was very much engaged in it. It concerned me. And then after a very surprising victory in the youth movement, nobody believed in Israel that this can happen. All of a sudden I found myself a very demanded person in the political life. And that's how it started. I was born in a small shtetl, Jewish shtetl, that during the two wars, the first and the second, it was under the Polish control, but otherwise it was Belarus, Russians. And they hated the Poles. They wouldn't speak the language. The place I was born was a very small place, totally Jewish. And we were living neither in Poland nor in Russia. We were living in Israel from the day I was born, even before immigrating. That was the dream. I went to a Hebrew school. At our home, we spoke 3 languages, Hebrew, Yiddish, and Russian. In my family, we have had members of the Likud and members of the left, and there was, again, a very vivid argument going all the time. My mother was a librarian, so from her I got a taste to read. And you wouldn't believe it, by the age of 9, I read already Dostoevsky, The Crime and Punishment, and I couldn't sleep at night. It bothered me tremendously. And I think I was living in my imagination much more than I was living in my realities. There are many Hebrew books, which I'm not sure that they will tell you the story. There is probably the most known one is Shalom Aleichem. But there were others. There was one that wrote about the future of Israel. Mapo was his name, and there were good boys and bad boys. The good boys were clearly Zionists. And I was on his side, he was on my side. We have a total agreement. And my grandfather, who educated me, basically, was studying in a yeshiva. You know what a yeshiva is? Yeshiva it's sort of a rabbinical seminar, but not with all the formalities, where they really study the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Bible. And it so happened that he was born, my grandfather, as my father, in the most famous yeshiva in Jewish life, in a place which is called Volozhin, Belarus. And my grandfather studied together with our greatest poet by the name of Chaim Nachman Bialik, who is considered our national poet to this very day. And from him, I learned the Talmud, the Bible. As a young boy, he taught me every day a page of the Talmud. I was under his spell. He was a rabbi. I was extremely religious when I was a young boy. It's only when I emigrated to Israel that I divorced my orthodox behavior and concept. And I changed my dress, I changed my eyes, I changed my outlooks, I changed my behavior. It was like moving from one world to another world, except for one thing, for the love of Israel, for the knowledge of the Hebrew language. That was my world. My father was a businessman, a very active and dynamic person. In the Second World War, he joined in the British Army. He became a prisoner of the Germans. He escaped. He was condemned to death. He was saved by a priest at the last moment. Then he ran away again. And again, he was caught and arrested. But one day he appeared alive, to our really happy surprise. They were very nice with me, you know. They never dared tell me what to do. They thought that somehow I'm a man with a reasonable judgment, and I was never under pressure from my parents. I could do whatever I wanted. I never had a negative word from them or nothing whatsoever. So they enabled me to grow up as an independent man. I was never under any imposition or pressure. And I'm telling all the time my wife, look, that's our children, go the same way. Let them go their way. The only thing we can provide them is with a personal example. If you want them to read books, have a good library at home. If you want them to love music, listen to music. if you want that their manners will be nice, have nice manners at home. So the best that we can offer to our children is a personal example. The shtetl is somewhere 100 kilometers south of Minsk, which is the capital of Belarus. There were, I think, 1,000 Jewish families. No non-Jewish person there. There were 2 synagogues built of wood. There was a Hebrew school that we have attended. There were political Israeli parties having branches there. And it's common among the Jewish people, we were deeply divided and we loved the division, highly polemic and argumentative. Now, I came when I was 11 years old. I thought I'm a prepared Israeli, but Israel was for me a total surprise. First of all, the place I came from had gray skies. I never saw a blue sky really in Belarus. It was half winterly all the year around. It has had a river that I took it for granted. The trees were high and powerful. We were surrounded by a forest. We never knew what is behind the forest. We know that behind the forest there are non-Jewish people. They don't like us. There was on occasion when I was very young, 8 years, 7 years old, that a Jewish businessman went through the forest and he was assassinated. And that was for the first time I saw in a paper, paper were very sensational in our place. I saw the story of assassination. It bothered me greatly. We have had a happy childhood. My family was well-to-do. We didn't have electricity. We have had a radio operated on batteries, which I destroyed because my parents used it on Shabbat, on Saturday. And I was so religious that I would not permit it to happen. I was religious as my grandfather, and they were already, more secular as many of the others. When I came to Israel, my first sensation was the blue sky. I never saw a sky as blue as that. Then I didn't see many rivers, which surprised me again. I didn't see many forests. But on the other hand, all the writings, whether in the streets or the paper, was in the Hebrew language. That was like entering, again, a new world. I saw Israeli policemen. And we came, my father, who emigrated before us a couple of years to prepare our coming, was living in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv was totally white and summerly and lovely. They called at that time Tel Aviv as the small Paris. I have never been to Paris, so I was sure that Paris is even smaller than Tel Aviv. And, when I got bar mitzvah, 13 years old, my parents bought me a bicycle, and they were touring the streets of Tel Aviv to see if they built a new building, they planted a new tree. I felt it as though it would be my estate, as though it would be my life. And then I went to school. I think I was a good student because I jumped over a school, And my main interest was basically history and literature. Sports were basically basketball and swimming at a pool. And I was so happy. Then we had a family in Rehovot, where the Weizmann Institute is, and that was the center of citrus growing. Now when you have the flowers of the citrus, it's like Chanel number 5. I mean, the smell is in there. You're almost being intoxicated by this unbelievable smell. And everything looked to me so beautiful, so optimistic, so happy. And then later on, I mean, at school, because of my views, I decided to go to Ben-Gurion, which is an agricultural school. So I left my studies in Tel Aviv and I went over to an entirely new life again. Living in the fields, among trees, among flowers, milking the cows, riding a horse. Again, it was a different world, but this was really not only a school, but a village of youngsters. So we were running our lives there too. And that's where I believe got my first taste for social life. And we had different groups for literature, for ideology, for culture. And as I told you, we made a small nucleus to go to the kibbutz. It was an intimate group. All of us supposed to tell the truth. We ran a collective diary. We were 15 or 16 young boys and girls. And the kibbutz was our idol. That was our destination. But the school, the village, is surrounded by Arabs. And they were shooting at us. So at the same age, I swore into the Haganah, under our underground organization, having the Bible on the table, having a pistol, having a candle. It was a clandestine organization at the time. And then during the day, we would study, and during the night, we were on guard in beton-made positions. The pistol belonged to the Haganah. So was the rifle. It was illegal. And it so happened that that was my first experience in the art of the military. And I reached a very high rank because we were two in our position. So I was the commander and the other was my deputy. This was the force I was commanding at the time. But we exchanged fire during the night. And my position was nearby one of the teachers of the school. And early in the morning, I fell in love with the girl that later on became my wife. And you know, at that time we were so naive. I wanted to charm her. So I read her The Capital of Marx. She was very passionate with me. And then also poetry. We have a group that was concerned with poetry, and I myself wrote a little bit of poetry. So again, we worked half a day, we studied half a day, and we watched half a night. And the rest, we were just happy. Since the so-called victory I had in the movement, the leadership of my party, headed by Ben-Gurion, another person who is not so known, Berg Zelenson, was the teacher of our movement. He actually taught me literature and he taught me how to read. He was my personal mentor. And he was the editor of our paper. He created a publishing house in Hebrew. And he was, I wouldn't say the guru, but really the teacher, the most respected man. And I wrote in the paper of the youth movement, he read it and apparently was impressed. So he invited me every Sunday night at his home. And mostly it was about literature. He told me which books he's going to publish. He told me what to read. The next time he examined me if I did read, if I did understand. And so I got my education from him. Once I did it, I returned back to the kibbutz. I mean, after my activities in the youth movement. But at that time, the party was already split between young and old, and there was a Zionist Congress immediately after the World War in 1946 in Basel, and the party sent two young Turks, so to speak, to represent the more extreme views of the party. One of them was Moshe Dayan, who later on became General Dayan, and myself, and there we have also developed a friendship that lasted for the rest of the time, to his very last day. I admired him before I met him. One upon a day, I was informed that Ben-Gurion will give me a ride from Tel Aviv to Haifa. At that time, it took 2 hours to do it. Imagine how excited I was. Here was my hero, my legendary man, and there is an unknown boy from nowhere. I thought, my God, I'm going to have 2 hours with this man. It was a winterly day. We entered the car, and to my unpleasant surprise, he put on the coat upon himself. He turned his back to me. He forgot about me. I was sitting so disappointed, up to the point we reached Haifa, very close to the place. Then all of a sudden he turned to me and he says, you know, Trotsky was not a statesman. How did Trotsky arrive in the car at the last moment? I didn't know. But me, being so much interested in having a conversation, I said, why? He says, what do you mean, why? What sort of a policy is that? No peace and no war. Either peace and pay the price, or war and take the risk. Otherwise, it's a Jewish invention. It's not a political decision. And he said Lenin, who was intellectually inferior to Ben-Gurion, became the leader of Russia because he made up his mind. So that was my first lesson from Ben-Gurion. And then I saw him making peace and saw him making war. And he mobilized me before the war. Now, the man was a very rare combination between a real intellectual and a born leader. And there is a contradiction between the two. Intellectuals are very slow to make up their mind. And even when they do it, they leave some room for skepticism and question. Not Ben-Gurion. He was never an intellectual bachelor. The minute he knew something, he has had an opinion. He was married with an opinion. But his talents were outstanding. I never saw a man with such a powerful memory like him. I can tell you stories upon stories to the depth of an outstanding quality of him. He was a person that was always curious, learning, reading. There wasn't a day without him reading. He learned new languages, including ancient Greek. He was curious, for example, about Buddhism. I'm not so sure that he could have understood him, because this tendency to the side, Buddhism is not necessarily a religion made of decisions. On the other hand, he was a leader. Namely, he was decisive, a strong will, fearless, honest, and he all the time thought that the greatest degree of wisdom is the moral call. Never be cynical. Never forget that every war is being fought twice, once in the battlefield and then in the books of history. Don't forget the books of history. Don't do things that history will never forgive you. History means posterity, means the young generation. Now, he was very organized. You know, for example, about his decisiveness, One day he told me that he started to learn Hebrew when he was 3 years old. I told him, Ben-Gurion, why were you waiting so much? I mean, you wasted 3 years. You should have started from the first day. He took it very seriously. He wouldn't waste time on small talks. He wouldn't waste time on jokes. He wouldn't waste time, for example, on eating properly. All those things were unimportant. So either he wouldn't refer to them or minimize them. What was important is to think, to read, to decide, and to be courageous. All told, in my judgment, he was a genius. Because a genius, more than it is just a matter of having outstanding talents, it's a matter of having an outstanding character. He was never afraid to be alone. He was never satisfied with a known answer. His priorities was to put the right question. And he questioned everything he knew, fearlessly. You know, one day he came to the conclusion that the story about Exodus is misinterpreted. Because the problem is how many Jews left Egypt. 150 families, 150,000, because in Hebrew, Elef is both thousand and family. And he came to the conclusion it's 150 families. So he made a press conference. The whole television from the whole world attended, and he made a very lengthy expose to explain why does he think this way, that way. Another person would do it. He never referred to the rank of a person, but only to his position. He would argue as seriously with a policeman as with the head of state. And the other thing I liked is when did he say I and when did he say we. Winning is we, losing is I, taking responsibility. I mean, he was not an easy person. He wasn't, a man of pleasantries, all the time organized, tough, serious. But for me, I worked with him 18 years. Every day was a holiday. And I learned from him as much as one can from another person. One of the things he said, and I liked very much, he says, all experts are for things that happened. You don't have experts for things that may happen. Which means, as he said, if you really want to run something, it's not enough to be up to date. You have to be up tomorrow. That would be my first lesson, to look for the tomorrow. And eventually I lost partly my interest in history. And I devoted most of my intellectual energies to the future. To this very day, I believe to imagine is more important than to remember. I don't believe in memories anyway, because memories in a way is to remember what to forget. You hardly remember the things that were not easy or were not right. And yet people think it's more important to remember than to think. That was my first lesson. My second lesson is your best friends are not only human beings, but books. To read books is like going to swim in a sea of wisdom, endlessly. Fascinating. And there are so many wise people all over the world, throughout history, and you can have it free for nothing. And reading must become a daily habit. It's not that you can read once a week. Either read day in and day out, and you make acquaintances with books. After a few pages, you know with whom you're dealing. Serious, unserious, far-sighted, repetitive. That was my second lesson. My third lesson was never forget there is nothing wiser than a moral choice. And the fourth point, don't be afraid to be alone. Future is always in a minority. So if you want to be popular, go and praise the past. If you want to serve the future, don't be afraid to belong to a minority. I joined in the army as a private. I was offered a rank at that time. I refused. I preferred to remain a private. First of all, I wasn't taken by ranks. And then before I knew, they put me anyway in the most sensitive positions. And I think if I should be, say, a colonel or a general, there will always be somebody above me. But if I should be a soldier, nobody will commend me. It shall be totally, and that's what happened. I mean, I was a private, but sitting in the heart of the Haganah and later in the army. Israel was shocked to discover that once the United Nations has decided to enable the establishment of a Jewish state, and before we have had a state, we had a war. And all of a sudden we're alone. We're outnumbered, outgunned. We saw the end of everything with our eyes. We knew the truth. We don't have arms, we don't have people, and we may lose the war, which would be like losing the Jewish history. It would be the end of Jewish history. We couldn't understand it. Even when it came to the United States, President Truman recognized the state of Israel, yet he refused to give us arms, rifles, for our self-defense. There was an embargo. And then Ben-Gurion says, look, without rifles, we can do nothing. And they put me in charge to break the embargo and see what can be done. And later on, there were some problems with our Navy, so he made me the head of the Navy. All things that I hardly knew anything about. I was basically an ignorant young man. I think what probably believe Ben-Gurion found in me was chutzpah, you know. I was a daring young man. And I wasn't afraid of conventions. And he thought that we don't have a chance for conventions or precedents. So I worked day and night. I believe I was a hard-working man. I could have worked almost day and night uninterruptedly. And then he nominated me also to be the head of the Ministry of Defense, as I've said, at a very young age, at 29. He was Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, so actually he handed over to my hands the running of the Ministry of Defense. And again, I mean, I didn't have any experience. But I have had views, and I was ready to fight for them. Everybody at that time was totally identified with the country, with the war, with the need to win. And that went on after the War of Independence. When the war was over, I found out that I'm so ignorant, I didn't know a single word of English, literary. nothing whatsoever. And I hardly have had any formal education. So I came to Ben-Gurion, who was my mentor. I told him, look, I can't go on like it. I have to learn something. I thought I want to go to the United States for study. So then he nominated me to be the head of the Defense Ministry mission in America, in New York. And I worked during the day. I studied at evening, at night, at a wonderful school, the New School for Social Research. I spent very formative 2 years. Then I went also for a course to the Harvard University, which is called AMP, a wonderful occasion again, where the students are people with experience already, people from the army, from the industry. And you can learn from the students as much as you can learn from the professors. Since, we are living under an embargo, I thought we don't have a choice but to build our own industries. And people say a small country like Israel cannot build an aeronautic industry, cannot build an electronic industry, cannot build nuclear reactors. And again, I thought we can do it, so I was charged with doing it. And in the beginning, it raised a great deal of skepticism and criticism. But later on, people appreciate it very much. So actually, we laid at that time the foundation for the high tech of Israel, which exists to this very day. I learned 2 things in my life. One is, no matter what you are, what matters is what you do. And when you're in power, don't judge yourself by the length of your term, but the record of your doings. I knew prime ministers who were in office years and years and years, and they did nothing. I know prime ministers who were a month and did a lot. Maybe the most outstanding example would be Mendes France of France. He did in 3 or 4 months that other prime ministers wouldn't do in 10 years. So that was my temperament. And once I was elected, I said to myself, let's decide what will be your priorities and how long will it take. Because if you don't decide on target dates, you may get mixed up with so many other pressures or attractions. And I put in 4 priorities. I mentioned also the dates. I said in 6 months we shall leave Lebanon. We left in 6 months. In 9 months we shall go out of inflation. People were skeptical. In a year's time, we shall restore our relations with Egypt, and then we shall begin to make peace with the Jordanians. When I came in, so I studied economy in the New School for Social Research, but I was very far from being an economist. The only economy I learned, again, was from Ben-Gurion. His economy was very simple. He would call me on and say, Shimon, let's do this and that. He says, okay. Then he would say, how much does it cost? I would say $1 million. He says, my God, where are we going to take the money? The next day he came in with another idea. Let's do this and that. He would ask me, how much does it cost? I would say $100 million. Oh, he says, that's nothing. So leaders should decide on the value of things, not on the cost of it. If it's important, it's economic. If it's unimportant, it's a waste of money. I came in and most of my friends told me, don't do it. You know very little about economy. the inflation was 500%. You cannot do it, but by military means or by having a strike, you'll break your neck. I listened to them, but I'm not sure I was impressed. I thought if you can make inflation, you probably can unmake it as well. And I always thought that never think about alternatives. Always think about creativity. When you have two alternatives, the first thing you have to do is to look for the third that you didn't think about. That doesn't exist. So I started to work day and night, listening to all walks of life in our economy. And there were 3 or 4 things that I learned immediately. That in a democracy, you have 2 groups of decision-making. The political parties, they are good for politics. And the economic partnership, which is detached from politics. Economy is not being run by parties, but by 3 factors in the society: government, employees, and employers. So leave the parties aside and try to see if you can reach an agreement among the 3. Don't be in a haste to declare a plan and then discover that 1 or 2 are against it. It will be extremely difficult to do so, particularly where the demands are very, very heavy. We asked the workers to give up 25% of their salaries, imagine. We asked the industrialists to freeze all costs, no matter what the inflation is. We asked people to save money as much as they can, but also the government to cut the budget. Now, I learned also soon enough that among the 3, 2 don't trust the third one. The third one is the government. Both industry and unions feel the government is a talking organization and a spending organization. And in a meeting among the 3, the government is all the time smart to demand from the others to cut, to freeze, to give up. And they feel, my God, what the hell are they talking? We shall cut, we shall freeze, we shall suffer, and they will spend again. So I learned again that if I want to do something, I have to show that the government is serious, not by declaring and not by preaching, but by cutting. And I knew that unless we should cut very deeply our budget, we don't stand a chance to have the other 2 parties. Now, cutting is easier said than done. Every minister, when you cut him, thinks that you have something against him. They took it very personally. The Minister of Defense and the Minister of Education and the Minister of Social Welfare. And they were my friends. And they have to become all of a sudden very cool. So finally we had the cabinet session. It lasted for 36 hours uninterruptedly. And they took a knife and sit personally and cut their budgets from $100,000 and up. If a poor minister would close his eyes, I would take my knife. But anyway, by the end of the session, it was cut, and people were fired. I thought the whole nation will be against me. But strangely enough, the reaction of the people was unbelievable. My popularity jumped to 90% or whatever it is. By firing people, by cutting budgets, education, social welfare, health, it affects every person. Then I was all the time in consultation with the unions and the industrialists. I called them and I says, gentlemen, now it's your turn. and they agreed. They agreed voluntarily to cut salaries, wages, to freeze prices, to reduce consumption. I was also very lucky to be held by the United States administration that was following very closely. The then Secretary of State was George Shultz, and his economic advisor was Herb Stein and Stanley Fischer, two very, very serious economists. And they advised me too. And they told me, if you do it, we shall provide you with a security net, because I was afraid the money may run away from the country. And we could have faced any situation like in Argentina. So this says, if you will be true to what you told us, we shall provide you with the necessary guarantee. And they did. They gave me $1.5 billion without any conditions. And we stopped printing money. And all of a sudden, the people started to trust the economy. And in a year time, we went down from 500% to 16%. So it became a classic turn around. I think they studied in universities to this very day. Again, what I may say, that while I was learning, as I did in the Ministry of Defense, I never knew, but I always learned. And it's worthwhile, when you do a thing like it, to listen carefully, both to the theoretic side and the pragmatic one. Not everything that a professor of economy will tell you is realistic. On the other hand, it's serious. But if you wouldn't listen to the people who are doers, and they will tell you, maybe it's right, but it's undoable, listen to them as well. So I constantly listen to the two sides. And also I knew that I have to make choices of my own. I worked with a group of people who worked day and night, professors, officials, the Minister of Finance at the time. But there were decisions that I have had to make. For example, the economists said, unless we shall have a deflation of 25%, we shall not save the economy. I asked them, 25%, what will be the size of unemployment? They gave me a staggering figure. So I said, I'm not going for it. I disagreed. And we got only 16%, not 25%. On the other hand, the opposite side, they wanted to suggested to put tax on the stock exchange, on the windfalls or profits of the stock exchange. And this time I took the position of the rightist against. The reason was, if you will do it, capital may run away from the country. And you cannot produce employment if you don't have the capital. Secondly, part of the investment in the stock exchange was public companies, pension companies, governments. And I felt if I shall tax them, in fact, I am not taxing the capitalist. I'm taxing the people who have saved, trust. And it was very controversial in all those sort of things. But finally, it worked out. I don't know if I'm proud, really. But if I have to compliment myself, I would just do it on those occasions where I have had a chance to save a life of a person or a child. This is, in my eyes, a real achievement. The rest, you try, you do, but the ultimate test is saving life.